The hospital room smelled of medicine and felt cold. Kidera lay on the bed, her body weak and tired. Machines beeped softly around her, but all she could feel was pain in her body and in her heart. Her grandmother sat beside her, holding her hand. "Will my dad come?" Chidera whispered, her voice barely audible. Ebube didn't know how to answer. She had called Ejiofor, begged him to come, but he refused. Chidera's eyes filled with tears. "Even my own father doesn't care if I live or die." Meanwhile, Ejiofor sat at the airport, waiting for his flight. His suitcase was by his side, and his mind was made up. He would leave everything behind, including the daughter he had never really met. How it started, Ejiofor wasn't always a cold man. He was once a quiet boy who found love when he least expected it. As a child, Ejiofor kept to himself. He was shy, always reading books or drawing alone. Other kids at school teased him for being too quiet, calling him weird. He felt like he didn't belong, until the day Ngozi walked into his life. Ngozi was different from the other kids. She was bright, lively, and friendly. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind. But Ngozi's life wasn't easy. She was born with a serious illness that kept her in and out of hospitals. Despite her struggles, she always had a smile on her face. One day, Ngozi noticed Ejiofor sitting alone during lunch. She walked up to him and said, "Why are you always by yourself?" Ejiofor shrugged. "No one wants to be my friend." "Well, I do," she said with a big smile. From that day, they were inseparable. Ngozi brought laughter into Ejiofor's quiet world. She made him feel like he mattered. They became best friends, and over time, their friendship grew into love. Years later, after finishing school, Ejiofor and Ngozi got married. It was the happiest day of their lives. They promised to be together forever, through good times and bad. But even after marriage, Ngozi's health problems didn't go away. She still had to visit the hospital regularly. Doctors warned them about the risks of having a baby. "It's too dangerous," the doctor said. "Ngozi's body is too weak to handle a pregnancy." Ejiofor agreed with the doctor. "We can adopt a child," he suggested gently. "I don't want to lose you." But Ngozi was determined. "I want to carry my own child," she said firmly. "I want a baby who looks like us." Ejiofor was scared. He loved Ngozi more than anything. He couldn't imagine life without her. He tried to convince her to reconsider, but she refused. Their disagreement grew into arguments. One evening, after a big fight, Ejiofor left the house, slamming the door behind him. Ngozi sat alone, crying, holding her stomach, and whispering to herself, "I just want to be a mother." Later that night, her health took a turn for the worse. Victoria, their maid, found her unconscious and rushed her to the hospital. When Ejiofor heard the news, he ran to the hospital, his heart pounding with fear. Seeing Ngozi lying on the hospital bed, weak and tearful, broke him. "I just want to be a mother," Ngozi cried, holding his hand. Ejiofor wiped her tears and finally agreed. "We'll do it your way," he whispered. When Ngozi found out she was pregnant, she was overjoyed. She held Ejiofor's hands tightly, tears in her eyes. "We're going to be parents," she whispered. Ejiofor smiled, but deep down, he was scared. The doctor had warned them about the risks. He loved Ngozi more than anything and didn't want to lose her. At first, the pregnancy seemed fine. They went for regular checkups, and everything looked okay. Ngozi started decorating the nursery and buying baby clothes. She was happy, excited about the future. But as the months went by, things got harder. Ngozi's body became weaker. She was always tired and often in pain. Ejiofor watched her struggle, worried every single day. "Maybe we should stop," he said gently one evening. "Think about your health." Ngozi shook her head. "No, I've come this far. I won't give up on our baby. One day, they got shocking news. Ngozi wasn't just having one baby, she was carrying twins. A boy and a girl, the doctor said with a smile. But we need to be very careful. This is high risk. Hearing this made Ngozi even more determined. She started making plans for both babies. She painted the nursery walls in bright colors and spent hours picking names. But Ejiofor couldn't shake the feeling that something bad might happen. At 6 months, things took a turn for the worse. Ngozi was decorating the nursery when she suddenly felt dizzy. Her chest tightened, and her vision blurred. She called out for help before collapsing on the floor. Victoria, their maid, heard the noise and rushed in. "Madam, madam," she cried, shaking Ngozi. When Ngozi didn't respond, Victoria quickly called an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctor gave Ejiofor heartbreaking news. "We need to do an emergency C-section," the doctor said. "It's the only way to save the babies, but the situation is very critical." Ejiofor's hands trembled as he signed the consent form. He paced the waiting room, praying for a miracle. Hours later, the doctor returned, his face solemn. "We did everything we could. The baby girl survived, but we lost your wife and the baby boy." Ejiofor's heart shattered. He fell to his knees, unable to breathe. His world had just fallen apart. Ejiofor sat quietly in the hospital room, staring at the tiny baby girl in the crib. The nurse handed her to him. "She's your daughter," the nurse said softly. "She needs you." But Ejiofor couldn't hold her. His hands trembled, and tears filled his eyes. "She took Ngozi from me," he whispered, pushing the crib away. His heart was broken. He couldn't look at the baby without remembering what he lost: his wife, his son, his happiness. Ngozi's parents, Ebube and Namdi, stepped in to take care of the baby. They named her Chidera, meaning God's will. Ebube loved her granddaughter dearly. She made sure Chidera had everything she needed, but there was one thing the little girl didn't have: her father's love. Ejiofor buried himself in work. He spent hours in his office, traveling from one business meeting to another. He avoided anything that reminded him of Ngozi, especially Chidera. "She's better off without me," he told himself. "I'll only bring her pain." As Chidera grew up, she often asked questions about her parents. "Why don't I have a mom and dad like my friends?" she asked Ebube one day. Ebube sighed and hugged her tightly. "Your parents loved you very much," she said gently. "But life can be hard sometimes." Chidera believed her parents were gone. She thought Ejiofor was just a distant uncle who rarely visited. Even when he came by, he barely looked at her. He stayed for a few minutes, spoke to Ebube, and left without saying a word to Chidera. Despite living in luxury, Chidera felt lonely. Her friends had parents who attended school events and celebrated birthdays with them, but she only had her grandmother. "Why doesn't he love me?" Chidera would ask herself after every visit. Years passed, and the distance between father and daughter grew. Ejiofor couldn't move past his pain. He convinced himself that staying away was best for both of them. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was running from his guilt, and the person who needed him most was the one he kept pushing away. Still, he refused to change. "It's better this way," he thought, but his heart knew otherwise. Chidera grew into a smart, beautiful young woman. She had everything money could buy: clothes, gadgets, and a big house. But inside, she felt empty. The one thing she wanted most was love from her parents, but she believed they were gone forever. Her grandmother, Ebube, tried her best to make Chidera happy. "You are special, my dear," she would say. "Your parents would be proud of you." Chidera smiled, but deep down, she felt different from other kids. She watched her friends laugh with their parents, and it hurt. "Why don't I have that?" she often wondered. By the time she was in her 20s, Chidera tried to focus on school and friends. But something unexpected happened. She started feeling sick. It began with tiredness and back pain. At first, she thought it was nothing serious. "I've just been studying too much," she told herself. But the pain got worse. She couldn't sleep, and her body felt weaker every day. One morning, after waking up with swollen feet and a pounding headache, she knew something was wrong. Ebube took her to the hospital. After several tests, the doctor gave them shocking news. "Kadera's kidneys are failing," the doctor said. "She needs a transplant as soon as possible." Kadera was stunned. "A transplant?" she whispered. "What does that mean?" The doctor explained that she needed a new kidney to survive. The best chance was finding a match from a close family member. Kadera sat in silence, processing what she just heard. "But I don't have parents," Chidera said quietly. Ebube's heart broke. She knew the truth. She knew Ejiofor was Chidera's father and the best chance for a match. Without wasting time, she called Ejiofor. "Your daughter needs you," Ebube said firmly. "She's very sick. Please come and get tested." Ejiofor remained silent for a moment before answering. "I'm sorry. I can't help," he said coldly, and hung up. Ebube was furious. She tried calling him again, but he wouldn't pick up. Chidera, who overheard the conversation, broke down in tears. "I have no one," she cried. "I'm going to die alone." Ebube hugged her tightly, but inside, she was filled with anger and sadness. She knew that time was running out. Chidera was getting weaker every day. She couldn't go to school or see her friends anymore. Her body hurt, and she spent most of her time in bed. She cried often, feeling hopeless. "Grandma, what if I don't make it?" she asked one evening, tears in her eyes. "Don't say that, my dear," Ebube replied, holding her hand. "We will find a way. You will get better." But deep down, Ebube was scared. The doctors said Chidera needed a kidney transplant soon, or she wouldn't survive. They needed Ejiofor to step up, but he was refusing to help. Ebube tried one more time to call him. "Ejiofor, this is your daughter's life," she pleaded. "She needs you. Please, come for the test." But Ejiofor remained cold. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this," he said. "How can you be so heartless?" Ebube shouted. "Ngozi would be ashamed of you." Ejiofor sighed. He didn't want to think about Ngozi or Chidera. It hurt too much. He had spent years trying to forget the pain of losing his wife. Helping Chidera meant opening old wounds he wasn't ready to face. "I've made up my mind," he said. "I'm leaving the country tomorrow for a business trip." Ebube couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Your daughter is dying, and you're running away?" Ejiofor said nothing. He hung up the phone. Meanwhile, Chidera lay in her hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. She felt abandoned and alone. "Why doesn't anyone want to save me?" she whispered. The next day, Ejiofor packed his bags and headed to the airport. He sat in the waiting area, thinking about his flight and his work. He convinced himself he was doing the right thing. "She's better off without me," he thought. As he waited, he noticed a man with 3 young children. The kids were climbing all over their father, laughing and playing. The man, Desmond, looked tired but happy. He hugged his children tightly, even as they made noise. Curious, Ejiofor started a conversation. "You seem like a good father," Ejiofor said. Desmond smiled. "My kids are my life. Their mother left us, but they give me a reason to keep going." Hearing this made Ejiofor pause. He suddenly felt a deep ache in his chest. At the airport, Ejiofor kept watching Desmond and his kids. The children were full of energy, running around and laughing. Desmond tried to keep them calm, but he never got angry. Instead, he smiled and hugged them, even when they made a mess. "You're doing this alone?" Ejiofor asked. "Yes," Desmond said. "Their mother left us. She chose another life, but I love these kids too much to give up on them." Ejiofor was surprised. "Isn't it hard?" Of course it's hard, Desmond replied. But they are my reason to live. Every day, I wake up for them. No matter how tired I am, they give me joy. Ejiofor felt a lump in his throat. He remembered Ngozi, her laughter, her strength, and her wish to be a mother. She had given everything to bring Chidera into the world. But what had he done? He had run away from his daughter, leaving her to suffer alone. Suddenly, he felt ashamed. Desmond's words echoed in his mind. They give me a reason to live. Ejiofor stood up, grabbing his suitcase. He couldn't sit there any longer. He couldn't leave Chidera behind. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone and called Ebube. Is she still at the hospital? He asked, his voice shaking. Yes, Ebube answered coldly. Why? Are you finally ready to be a father? I'm coming, Ejiofor said. I'm sorry. I was wrong. He rushed out of the airport, got into a cab, and headed straight to the hospital. His mind raced with thoughts of Chidera. He pictured her as a baby, the little girl he had refused to hold. He pictured her now, lying sick and alone. When he arrived at the hospital, he found Ebube in the waiting room. Her eyes were red from crying. Please, Ejiofor said, dropping to his knees. I'm sorry for everything. I'm ready to help her. Ebube stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Go to her, she said quietly. Ejiofor walked into Chidera's room. She lay there, weak and pale. His heart broke. He sat beside her bed and whispered, I'm here, my daughter. I won't leave you again. Ejiofor sat by Chidera's hospital bed, watching her sleep. Her face looked pale, and her breathing was slow. He couldn't believe how much he had missed. His heart ached as he thought about the years he had stayed away. I should have been here, he whispered to himself. Chidera slowly opened her eyes and saw him. At first, she blinked, unsure if she was dreaming. Then her face turned cold. What are you doing here? She asked weakly. I'm your father, Ejiofor said softly. And I've been a terrible one. Chidera turned her head away, tears filling her eyes. You left me. You never cared. I did care, Ejiofor said, his voice shaking. But I was scared. I lost your mother, and I didn't know how to handle it. I was wrong to leave you. Chidera didn't say anything. She was too hurt to speak. I'm here now, Ejiofor continued. I want to make it right. I'll do whatever it takes to help you get better. Chidera looked at him for a long moment. Why now? Why didn't you come before? Ejiofor lowered his head in shame. I was selfish. I let my pain control me. But I've realized something. You're my reason to live. I can't run anymore. Tears rolled down Chidera's cheeks. She wanted to believe him, but her heart was still broken. I've been alone for so long, she whispered. I don't know if I can trust you. Ejiofor wiped his own tears. I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I won't leave again. I'll stay by your side, no matter what. At that moment, a nurse came in. Mr. Ejiofor, we're ready for your transplant test, she said. Ejiofor stood up. I'm ready. He looked back at Chidera. No matter what the result is, I'll be here. I won't give up on you. Chidera watched as he left with the nurse. Her heart was heavy with pain. But deep inside, a small part of her hoped he was telling the truth. The next day, Ejiofor sat nervously in the hospital, waiting for the test results. He tapped his foot, his mind racing. What if I'm not a match? He thought. What if I'm too late to save her? Finally, the doctor walked in. Good news, the doctor said. You're a match. We can do the transplant right away. Ejiofor let out a deep breath, relief washing over him. Let's do it, he said firmly. The surgery was scheduled for the next morning. As Ejiofor lay on the hospital bed, getting ready for the procedure, he thought about Ngozi. He imagined her smiling, proud that he was finally stepping up for their daughter. "I won't let you down this time," he whispered. The transplant went well. Both Ejiofor and Chidera were stable after the surgery. When Ejiofor woke up, he asked for Chidera immediately. He wanted to see her, to make sure she was okay. He sat by her bed, waiting for her to wake up. His heart was full of guilt and hope. He held her hand gently. "Please wake up," he whispered. "I need to tell you everything." A few hours later, Chidera's eyes slowly opened. She looked around, confused, until her gaze landed on Ejiofor. "You're still here?" she asked, surprised. Ejiofor nodded, tears in his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I'm staying with you for good." Chidera stared at him, unsure what to say. "I've made many mistakes," Ejiofor continued. "I let my pain control me. I was too scared to face you because you reminded me of your mother. But that wasn't fair to you. You deserve a father. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you." Chidera's eyes filled with tears. "I needed you," she said softly. "I needed you for so long." "I know," Ejiofor replied. "And I promise, I'll never leave you again. I want to be the father you deserve." There was a long silence. Then Chidera squeezed his hand gently. "I'm still hurt," she whispered. "But maybe we can start over." Ejiofor smiled, tears rolling down his cheeks. "We will, one step at a time." For the first time in years, Chidera felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, her family wasn't lost after all. Months after the surgery, Chidera grew stronger. She and Ejiofor spent time together, sharing stories and memories. Slowly, their bond grew. Ejiofor often talked about her mother, Ngozi, and the love they shared. "I want to make her proud," Ejiofor said one day. "And I want to make things right with you." Chidera smiled. "We're getting there. It's not perfect, but it's better." They started doing simple things together, going for walks, cooking meals, and laughing. Chidera began to see him not as a distant stranger, but as her father. And Ejiofor, for the first time in years, felt joy again. Together, they decided to start a foundation in Ngozi's name to help women with risky pregnancies. It was their way of honoring her memory and giving back. Chidera finally had the one thing she always wanted: a family. This story reminds us that it's never too late to make things right. Love and forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds. If you enjoyed this story and want more captivating tales like this, please subscribe to my channel. Your support helps us share these stories with the world. Don't forget to like, comment, and share. Let's spread the lessons and stories that inspire us all.